All right, there we go. The little timer started. Welcome back. Today we're looking at module 33, stress and illness. So as always, you can find the PowerPoint where you're finding this video, unless you're looking at it specifically at YouTube, in which case you can't. You got to find it in D2L. You can find module 33 on page 384. This is part of a two-part or two-module section, basically looking at stress, health, and human flourishing. These are the last two modules of Psych 101. So we're almost done. Congratulations. But yeah, so as always, listen for the 4 random facts as we go. Don't forget to take note of them, that way you can pass the quiz, and don't forget to take the quiz over the module itself. So the 2 different sets there. Beyond that, I think that's pretty much everything. So let's get rolling. So stress and illness. And then the next one, we're actually looking at happiness, which is kind of nice. I prefer 34. That was kind of more my specialty with looking at counseling stuff. But it's important to understand the negative sides of things in order to understand basically why the happiness works. So slide 2, stress and illness, part 1. Stress, some basic concepts. We've covered these to some extent in some different modules, looking at like biology side of things back at the very beginning. But we're going to be covering a little bit more in depth here. So, process of appraising and responding to a threatening or challenging event. This is going to be your stressor. Okay. Anything, literally anything, can potentially be a stressor. A stressor is simply an external or even sometimes internal something that we perceive as a threat in some way, shape, or form. That could be good, that could be bad, right? It could be a bear charging you. It could be, or a dog, slamming against the fence and like trying to rip your head off, kind of a thing. It could be your crush walking down the hall towards you. It could be getting ready for a wedding. It could be getting ready for a baby if you're a brand new parent. All of those things potentially could be stressors, right? It could be extra work at work or a paper that's coming up. You probably just finished up your paper, right, for this one. So all of those things potentially are stressors. The stress reaction is essentially what you do given that new stimuli of the stressor and how you interpret that. So if you don't see it as very stressful, you're not going to have very much of a stress reaction. On the other hand, if you see it as extremely stressful, you're going to have a very high stress reaction, which is essentially that fight or flight mode, right? Where your body is kicking into action mode. It's increasing the overall your overall system, getting ready for action. So yeah, it's interesting. On one hand, this can be a very good thing, right? If a bear is charging you, it gives you the energy to run away and or climb a tree or something like that, or stand and fight, depending on what the thing might be. It's oftentimes it can if it's in a short burst, right? It might be a good thing. Or if you perceive the threat as a challenge rather than a obstacle, it can be a positive thing. It gives you that energy to basically overcome that and perform at your best. At a low level, in a small burst, boom, okay, your immune system can actually get mobilized and kind of pick up. It can improve your motivation overall, and generally, if it's not too much stress for you, it can actually help you with building your resilience, which is essentially your ability to deal with stressful events and those kinds of things. So it generally and historically, it would have been considered a positive response, right? The stress response is basically just getting your body ready to go. However, there are some times when it can be not so helpful. If the effect or if the response is extreme, right? You might have seen people when they get up to do a speech. Or I've seen some poor people it's a tough one, but so public speaking is actually one of the biggest fears. It comes second only to death for people's like the number one fear in your life kind of a thing. Some people actually put it higher than death, but if you've ever seen somebody get up for a speech, or maybe you've gotten up for a speech and you hear, and your legs are about to buckle and everything is just kind of is not going so well. That is an overreaction to the stressor that is present. But again, so what you've essentially done is you have the stressor has presented itself. This is presenting in front of people. The reaction, though, is over. You are interpreting it basically as potential death, which is why we have such an extreme fear reaction in those cases. Now, there's a lot of people who don't, right? There's a lot of people who they could stand in front of people, like myself. I'm a teacher. This is, when I was younger, I remember first speech class, I had to do a 2-minute speech, and I was like, oh my goodness. And now I talk for literally hours. Once I realized that basically it's just having a conversation, right? If I know my material, it's no big deal. But you got to make sure you know your material to reduce that stress level. But anyway, if you have an extreme response, it can be daunting. I had a friend, I don't remember if I talked about this in this one or not, or these video series or not. I had a friend who he was in we were in a class together. We had a final. It was a big one. It was worth a lot. We were allowed to bring in 1 page of notes. So we could go front and back of 1 page of notes. So he brought his notes in. He looked at it, stuck it in his bag right before class. I saw him looking at his notes, stuck them in his bag. The class before us ended. We went inside. He pulled out his notes, set them on the desk next to him. The test was given out. He flipped the test over, looked at his notes, and realized his notes were blank. He had a blank page in front of him. Okay. He was extremely nervous about this test. When the test was done, he turned his test in, picked up his blank sheet, didn't put it back in his bag, picked it up, kept it in front of him, walked out of the room, looked down, and all of his notes were present on his sheet of paper. He had such a high stress response that his mind blanked the information on his page. That was an exceptionally high stress reaction, or extreme. But that's unusual, but it is possible, right? It can make us, if it gets too high, it makes it harder. Prolonged stress is also a big issue. If you have just like even a small amount of stress, but it just never goes away, that can cause some significant impacts on things like your immune system. Because essentially, you're just kind of constantly in fight or flight mode. So your body isn't able to truly relax and rebuild and refill all of the hormones and things that it needs to do. So there's actually a pretty high level of people out there today who have adrenal deficiency, where basically the adrenal glands are overtaxed and don't have time to refill themselves, so that you just kind of feel constant fatigue and brain fog and all those kinds of things. Also, not to mention that when we go into fight or flight mode, stress level, inflammation will increase in our body, because inflammation is a natural precaution against injury. It's the same thing, like if you twist an ankle and your ankle kind of swells, that's the reason it swells is inflammation, and it's a way for your body to basically protect itself temporarily. If, though, you are under constant stress, so like let's say you get in the car for your drive in the morning, traffic's bad, it's bad every day, so you're stuck in traffic all the time. Maybe on top of that, you're drinking a lot of coffee and things, which also basically artificially push you into a stress level. All of those things combined can lead to basically just and then you have like kind of a stressful job, and then plus you're in school right now, obviously, otherwise you wouldn't be watching these videos probably. So you got possibly family things, right? All these little stressors that just kind of pile up, and it makes it to where potentially you have this nonstop stress. Okay. When we are stressed, we generally are not performing at our best if it's chronic and or extreme. So risky decision making and unhealthy behaviors are oftentimes connected to stress. We make choices to try to help us deal with stress, but our mind isn't necessarily thinking as clearly as it should be due to the fact that we are experiencing either chronic or extreme stress. Okay. So I just got all done with the lecture and realized I never gave the 4 random facts. So I'm going to put little clips in, mixed in through here. So first random fact, in Zimbabwe, it is illegal for citizens to make offensive gestures at a passing car. So if you're in Zimbabwe, no giving anybody the bird. All right, that's the first random fact. So here we go. We'll keep making more of these and putting them in as we go. So back to the lecture. All right. So slide 3, you can see that the image that we're looking at here, you can also see in the book on page 384. Real quick, I wanted to mention too, on page 384, Extreme stress. They had there's a picture of a young man in a wheelchair embedded in like his wheelchair is embedded in the front of a semi. Um, the story is that basically this guy started to cross the street in his wheelchair, and a semi didn't see him, took the turn and hit him, but he was going slow enough that it didn't hurt him, but it turned his wheelchair and the handles lodged in front of it, and the semi proceeded to go down the highway or interstate with him in his wheelchair in front of it, which that is probably the biggest stress I could possibly think of, right? You're just like totally along for the ride. So anyway, but back to the little image that we're looking at. So this is kind of how this works, right? We have a stressful event, a tough math test, maybe a first date, whatever, right? It could be good, could be bad. Dog aggressively approaching you. We appraise it, right? We stop and we look at it and go, what is this? Is it a threat? Yikes, this is beyond me, like if it's a math test. A challenge, I've got to apply all I know. Those are two different ways of appraising the same thing, right? And then you have a response. You either have it stress to distraction, where it maybe is overwhelming, or aroused, because your body is getting ready for action, so the adrenal glands and everything are releasing. Your body is primed, basically, which can increase your arousal and focus in those cases. So how we interpret it is going to be, and appraise the given stressor is going to be the most important factor here, right? First time I stepped in the ring, I was terrified. After several times of stepping in the ring, not such a big deal. Like I knew I could get punched in the face and then probably would be able to walk away from it, right? Unless the guy was a monster. But yeah, those kinds of things, right? First time you perform, first time you give a speech, all those times before you have the experience, it can be nerve-wracking. But then you learn to basically to appraise it differently, to recognize that maybe you're nervous, but you can use that nervousness to help you rather than having you to the point of distraction, essentially. Okay. So our interpretation of it has a big thing. Actually, there's a video. If you look at the videos for this week, you can look at, there's one called Kelly McGonigal, How to Make Stress Your Friend. It's an excellent video. There's a decent chance you might have already seen it. But Kelly McGonigal is a researcher, psychologist, that she works specifically looking at stress and its effects on people. And so it's a really good little talking about changing our mindset of stress in order to basically change how it affects us. All right, random fact number 2. Another term for nieces or nephews is nibblings. I think that should be something we use more often, kind of like siblings, but nibble version, nibblings, for nieces and nephews. There you go, random fact number 2. Back to the lecture, I recommend that. Slide 4, stress and illness, part 3, stressors. So you have big ones, right? Catastrophes and things like that. So large-scale disasters, like Hurricane Katrina, probably over a decade ago now. Your house burns down, or there's a forest fire near you, things like this. These big events, wars, all those kinds of things. Those things can become big effects on us. It changes our lives in many ways, and this can essentially cause long-term. Maybe you have to relocate now, find a new job, kind of restructure your life. That's a big one, right? You also have the potential of like acculturative stress, which is going to be it's going to slowly fade over time. Essentially, this is where you have a big stressor happens, and then if you can engage in things that kind of help overcome it, it'll reduce the overall effects of it. Connecting socially and things like that, essentially, and that's acculturative is this part there, will reduce the negative effects of the overall event. So Hurricane Katrina, terrible event. Maybe you lost your home or something like that, let's say, but you band together with friends and family, in the process of kind of overcoming it. So yeah, that can help reduce the significant or negative impacts of that stress. Significant life changes could be good, could be bad, right? Maybe first time you're moving out of home, right after high school, could be going into high school if you're younger. First time you're again living on your own or trying to figure out all those kinds of things. First baby, getting married, all these things that are causing a big big shift in life. Could be good. We could see it as good, but it's still going to be stressful, right? It can get compacted if you end up basically having like a whole bunch of smaller crises that kind of unpack as time progresses. So if you've just moved out of the house, say, for example, so now you have to find a new home to stay in. Let's say you're going to college. So now you have to figure out where you're going to be staying. Maybe that's the dorms. Maybe that's an apartment near campus or whatever. Possibly for the first time in your life, you have to figure out like groceries and things like that. What are you going to eat and how are you going to eat it and how are you going to cook it and all those kinds of things. Hopefully you've got some training in that beforehand, but that a lot of people don't. Now you also got to figure out the new area, more than likely, new town or something like that. You got to figure out the school that you're in. You got to figure out the classes. You got to figure out what the professors are wanting. You got to make new friends possibly, right? Lots of small things that kind of compile to make this potentially a bigger and more intimidating or stressful event. Okay. And then daily hassles. Interestingly, what they found actually, there's been a lot of research done on this, and they found that we handle big catastrophes better typically than the daily hassles of life. So something terrible happens, and most people were going to show a lot of resilience. They just bounce back from it, right? Sure, it's terrible in the moment, but overall, we come back to a state of equilibrium, that kind of good balance in life, relatively quickly. Usually within about 2 or 3 months, we've kind of refound our balance. The problem with daily hassles, so this would be like the same as like somebody punching you with everything they've got, but it's one punch. Okay, it rocks you, but if they're not throwing any more punches, you have time to recover and kind of bounce back. Daily hassles are somebody that just kind of keep on jabbing at you. I don't know if that helps if you're a fighter, that maybe that would help. But it's lots of small things that just kind of pile up. It can be compounded by prejudice and life circumstances. So maybe you're struggling, financially, things like that. If you're a student, there's a good chance, at least I know from my experience, I struggled financially throughout my student years. But all those kinds of things can also add up onto it. And it's those small things that just keep on piling every single day. Bills every month coming up. You got to get groceries. You got to, walk the dog. You got to do all these things. And they're small stressors. Any one of them isn't that big of a deal. But it's the fact that you have all of them happening at the same time. And that can add up. Psychological and physical consequences of these are basically going to be that you might struggle with like fatigue, depression, anxiety. Physically, you might end up with like additional like inflammation and things like that, which increases chances of heart attack and cancer and diabetes and all these things. Right now, I'm adding to your stress. But if we don't come up with a good way to basically deal with these stressors, it can have a negative effect. Not guaranteed, right? And in fact, how you even view stress can have an impact on how the stress affects you. If you view it as beneficial, right? It's helping me get ready for taking action. Then we tend to not see it as negative, and it doesn't affect us as negatively, which is kind of an interesting thing. So yeah. And then there's things we can actually do to compound this, right? If we smoke and have nicotine things, if you drink a lot of caffeine every day, caffeine essentially hijacks this whole system and basically stresses you out. Makes your brain think that there's an emergency, even though there's not necessarily. So if you are struggling with things like anxiety or stress-related issues, you might look at either reducing or cutting caffeine out, at least for a while, until your body can kind of come back into check. Okay. Slide 5, stress and illness, part 4, stress response system, Canon. So stress response is part of a unified mind-body system, right? It's a physical response with a psychological or emotional connection and or interpretation connected to it. So we have our body gets ready for action. We interpret that body rising. We talked about this one with emotions, right? Essentially, it's us getting ready for something. We have essentially 2 states. We have low key or keyed up kind of thing. And so depending on which one is turned on there, and how much and how then we process that, right? Then fight or flight adaptive response. We actually have fight, flight, or freeze, and there's actually a couple of other ones that they've thrown in there recently. But those are the main 3. When something comes before you, you either hunker down and you're ready to fight it, take it on, you run away from it, or you just freeze because you're not sure what to do in that moment. Your brain kind of turns off. Actually, you get that deer in the headlights, kind of a thing, where you're assessing the situation and trying to figure out what's the best course of action to take. So yeah, and this is going to be pretty common. Siley said Siley. Okay, general adaptation syndrome, or GAS. You have phase 1, which is the alarm reaction, right? Something happens and boom, a bear charges out at you, or you just see that person you have a crush on and you weren't expecting them to be there, and maybe your hair is all a mess or whatever. Okay, right? We have that like moment, and that's going to be the first reaction. At that point, this is where you might get like the butterflies in the stomach feeling, or feel nauseous, right? Your hands might get sweaty. You might feel your face flushing, turning red, and being like, oh man, like this is, you feel like heat on the back of your neck and maybe on the ears and things like that, right? You might also have the urge to go to use the restroom. All of those things are going to be that initial like response as your body is getting ready for action. It's not sure what the threat is. The body is not sure what the threat is. It just knows that there is something that you are reading as a stressor. Okay. So it builds up and gets ready for it. It diverts blood to the skeletal muscles, getting you ready for action in some way, shape, or form. You need to run, you need to fight, whatever. Phase 2 is going to be resistance. This is going to be where essentially your body is maintaining that heightened level for as long as needed, right? It wouldn't do you much good if it was like, oh, you're ready, and then it just like shuts you down, and you're like, and you have no energy to actually continue to fight and or run and or do whatever. So it maintains it as long as it deems necessary. So as long as you are psychologically reading something as a threat, whether it is or not, and whether it's mental, physical, whatever, if you see it as a threat, it brings you up, and you maintain this as long as it seems to be needed. Followed by exhaustion, where basically we have depleted ourselves. Our body then needs to take time to recover. This worked extremely well in the past, right? Ice Age hardware in a modern world, right? Hunter-gatherer is what we were basically made for. So, maybe you're hunting a mammoth and you're like, bah! And you're going with a spear and, boom, you get the mammoth, and it's massive amount of stress, potentially going to kill you or your friends or family or whatever. You finally have conquered it, and you have that, oh, okay. I experienced this a lot when I used to do rock climbing all the time, right? You would do something, it would just be insane. It was ridiculously stressful. But once it's all done, you have that like sense of like, whew, relief. If you ever hunted, you might get like buck fever where you start to shake when you're hunting. That can be a sign of basically this level. And it might be like where you're calm in the process, you do it. Or let's say you're an emergency responder. You've shown up on a scene. I used to be a search and rescue I helped with it. But anyway, you can show up on the scene. Something bad has happened, right? In the moment, you feel cool and collected, but your body is stressed. And that's why at the end of it, you have that, you're like, oh, just wiped. That's going to be that normal pattern. So human body copes well with temporary stress, but may be damaged by prolonged stress. We are made for this cycle, right? Stressor happens, boom, we have it high as long as we need it. The mammoth falls, the person is rescued, whatever, right? The conversation has been had with the said crush, and then you have that relax, okay? And that crash at the end basically is your body starting to take the time to recover from the overutilized hormones and everything else that it has just put out in that process. So yeah, what happens though if we have prolonged stress, right? If it doesn't go away, we don't have an opportunity to basically have that exhaustion and rest. We might be exhausted. We might have gone through, you had your alarm reaction. You've been up here in resistance mode. You're running out. And so you're basically like, it's like a plane running out of fuel, right? It's going down. You can't help it, but you're not allowed to land. What's going to happen, right? And so that's where we're dealing with a lot in today's world is a lot of people are struggling with a lot of health issues and things connected to this fact that they're not allowed to basically rest and recover because the stress is just always there. Okay. Slide 6. So stress and illness, part 5. Due to the ongoing conflict, Syria's White Helmets volunteer rescuers are perpetually in alarm reaction mode, rushing to pull victims from the rubble after each fresh attack. As the resistance is depleted, they risk exhaustion. You're going to find this with forest firefighters and things like that also, but especially lately, it seems like the last few years, so many big fires, right? But it wears you down. Now I know the White Helmets, you might have heard about them. There's a lot of controversy over them because they've actually been found to be connected to different terrorist groups. But there was a documentary, I think Netflix did a documentary on them a number of years ago. But they were like heroes, and then it came out that they were also possibly terrorists. But anyway, whatever you think about it, it is true. What they are doing, where they're running in and helping people after bombs and things have gone off, when it happens regularly, it can be exhausting. Okay, you can find it. There's a picture of these guys coming up, but there's also one in the book on page 388 where they talk about the White Helmets. So gender differences and coping strategies. There are some significant differences between males and females in this case, and it doesn't seem to just be cultural. This seems to be kind of like almost a biological factor, right? A genetic tendency. So if you are struggling with high risk all the time, or living in a state of exhaustion, it does increase chances of death overall. Which that might not relieve your sense of stress, but what they found is like it increases chances of a heart attack and all those kind of things, right? Things that you can do to decrease the likelihood of that happening are the tend and befriend response, which is essentially when you feel stressed, you seek out people to connect to. Women, by far, worldwide, are much better at this than men are. Men have a tendency of withdrawing instead of connecting, right? Something terrible happens and you just kind of hunker down. You're like, I'm going to take care of it. I can do it myself. That is not generally the best way to handle stress. I wish it was, because that's what I tend to do. But I have taught myself to basically fight against my natural desire to just hide myself away in the corner somewhere and just kind of work through it. To instead seek out either family or friends. Excuse me, I got the hiccups. Either family or friends to help overcome those issues. So also men have a higher tendency of using things like alcohol and stuff to kind of numb themselves as the stress begins to overwhelm them, which is not generally a good method, right? I would say that alcohol should only be used in times of happiness. If you're feeling down, alcohol probably is not going to be your friend. So use it for celebrating, not for coping, basically. This is generally a kind of a good rule of thumb. So slide 7, and that's if you're 21 or older, right? Don't be drinking if you're underage. That really is important actually for development. If you're under 21, technically even if you're under 25, drinking too much is definitely going to have some negative effects long term on your brain development. So think about that one. Keep yourself smart. And you might be like, I'm a teenager, therefore this is what it doesn't touch me. That's that. There's a Wolverine syndrome that basically adolescents go through. If you want to learn more about that, take Psych 235. But essentially, the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until 25, and that is the part of the brain that goes, hey, this might actually hurt you. And so the part of your brain that does that, it makes us we seek out risk in adolescence and early adulthood more than we do after the age of 25, give or take. But anyway, that's a total side thing. Slide 7. Celia's general adaptation syndrome. So this is that picture that you find on page 388, where you have the stressor occurs and you have an initial dip where you have the alarm reaction, and then our body goes up to cope with the stress. We're at a heightened level. It can only go so long though, right? It's like the same thing like a tank of fuel on a plane or in a car. It can only go so long without getting refilled. And so even if you have like a reserve tank, you flip the switch and you've got so many more miles. Well, if you've already flipped the switch, you've only got so much, right? And so at some point you're going to crash. I knew a guy, I'd say he was kind of like a friend. He was an older gentleman, fought in Vietnam War. He was a Green Beret in Vietnam. He at one point, he said he was in the middle of a firefight. They'd been going for a little over 40 hours. he was full on exhausted. He had shooting a 50 caliber machine gun from a stand in a tree. So he was like propped up in a tree with a 50 caliber machine gun. In the middle of a firefight, people shooting at him. He said branches were falling down all around him. He fell asleep. He was going right while the gun was still firing. He was asleep on the gun. He's like that is true exhaustion at that point. Luckily, they survived. At least most of the guys in his group survived from that conflict. But yeah, there comes a point when your body just like, nope, you can't do it, and it puts you down, right? So, slide 8, stress and illness, part 6, stress and vulnerability to disease. So, health psychology. There's a whole subfield of psychology basically that provides psychology's contribution to behavioral medicine. It's looking at how does psychology affect our overall health, where you have the psychoneuroimmunology, which is basically psychology, right? The study of kind of how our thinking and stuff, and neuro, the brain, affects our immune system. It's the study of those. The ology part is the study of those. So study how psychological, neural, and endocrine processes together affect the immune system and resulting health. So stress, again, how we view stress will affect us differently. But generally speaking, stress does have a negative impact on our overall health if we don't have a chance to recover. Short bursts, no big deal. Long-term, non-stop stress, potentially a bigger deal, but not guaranteed. Okay. 9, stress and illness, part 7. Psychological states have physiological effects, right? And we know that. How you're feeling mentally is going to affect how your body is reacting, and vice versa. It's very much tied into each other, as we've been looking at all semester, right? Stress can reduce the ability to fight disease. Basically, because in a stress response, your immune system kind of gets turned down or turned off in some cases, because it doesn't really matter, right? You got a cold coming, who cares? You got to get that bear is going to kill you right now. So we're going to kind of give more energy toward muscles rather than towards immune system. So with that, it increases, like if you are feeling stressed, you increase the chances of getting ill. Delay surgical wound healing. They've done several studies, and they found that people, if you have higher amounts of stress and you go in for surgery, it'll increase the amount of time needed pretty significantly to heal up. They found in some cases, some of the studies have found like 40%, it takes 40% longer. So if it would take you, 6 days, it takes you 10, kind of a thing, to heal up from a given wound or from surgery and things like that. It increases vulnerability to colds, again, viruses, things like that. If your immune system isn't strong or as strong as it could be, increases likelihood that you're going to get a disease. And it can hasten the disease's course. You can get it stronger, faster than if your system was healthier. Unfortunately, this doesn't mean like you get rid of it faster. It means that it sets in stronger and more fully, right? It kind of digs itself in rather than going through. So, important note, stress doesn't make you sick. It makes you more susceptible to sickness, generally. Okay. It alters your immune function and reduces the ability to resist infection specifically. Now, it potentially can cause some things like heart issues and things like that, but that's not really illness. That's just your body wearing out, and or from damage and things like that. So, but stress, it's not like, well, I'm stressed, therefore I'm going to get a cold. If the cold virus is present, the rhinovirus is present, and you get stressed, you are more likely to basically have that cold beat your immune system and make you sick. Okay. And number 3, walking uses a total of 200 muscles with every step. That's your third random fact. 200 muscles with every step, just to take out while you're going walking. So there you go. Back to the quiz. Not the quiz. Back to the lecture. So 10, stress and health. There's an image of this also found on page 389. Basically kind of just goes through and shows what the different parts of our immune system do. So you have intruders coming in. If it's a bacterial infection, you've got B lymphocytes, which basically fight bacterial infections. That's what they do. If it's cancer cells, virus, or other foreign substances, you have T lymphocytes. Both of these things are going to be their white blood cells. The B lymphocytes and the T lymphocytes are different forms of white blood cells. If there's a harmful intruder or perhaps a worn out cell needing to be cleaned up, you got the macrophage cells, the big eaters, which basically just that's what they do. They go through and clean out things. They'll engulf it and destroy it. If there are there disease cells such as infected by viruses or cancer that need to be cleared out, you got the natural killer cells or NK cells, which go through and clean out those other cells that have been damaged. Okay. So yeah, all of those basically get reduced if you're experiencing chronic stress. Okay. Slide 11. Stress and illness, part 8. Cancer. Stress does not create cancer cells. Okay. What stress can cause potentially is inflammation, and inflammation can increase the likelihood of cancer cells forming in the long run. But it's not like you're stressed, therefore you get cancer. That's not how that one works. Now, if you have cancer, it is good to reduce your stress as much as possible to give your immune system as much strength as possible. Right? Allow your body to do what it needs to do. And so again, that's the big issue there, right? Our bodies can't function as high as they could if we are chronically stressed, generally. Heart disease, coronary heart disease, or type A personality versus type B personality. They found that people who are more uptight and pessimistic have a significantly higher chance of getting heart disease than people who are more laid back. So if you're a type A personality where you're like uptight, kind of aggressive, go-getter type of a personality, there's actually a higher risk of heart disease compared to people who are just kind of like go with the flow, laid back, chill people. Okay. And that was pretty much across the board. So the more pessimistic, uptight, oftentimes is connected to higher levels of stress, which again, that your body can have higher levels of blood pressure and things like that, which increases heart disease due to the stress, essentially. Inflammation, blood vessel inflammation, for example, can be an issue, but inflammation pretty much anywhere. Like it can increase if you're under a lot of stress. If you have arthritis, things like that, it can increase the symptoms of that due to the fact that basically your body is putting itself into that mind, like that setting of trying to take care of injuries and things like that. Okay. Oh, the image that we see here too, you can find on page 392, the little graph. It shows the difference between pessimists, neutral, and optimists. They did a 10-year study where they were looking at they took a group of men, they assessed their personality, and they watched them for 10 years, and they saw what the likelihood of developing coronary heart disease was over the course of the 10 years. Pessimists had a significantly higher rate of heart disease, coronary heart disease forming. So if you're a pessimist, try not to be. Move as close to neutral as you could in that case. If you're an optimist, roll with it. As long as it's not causing you problems, go ahead and roll with it. 12, does stress cause illness? No. No. Okay, you can find this image that we're looking at here on page 393. It's the little graph at the top that says thinking critically about stress and health. So basically we have factors here. We got persistent stressors, you're fired, the death of loved ones, all those bills and things that keep coming in the mail. If you have a tendency towards anger, pessimism, or depression, that can kind of compound the issues there, which can also lead to unhealthy behaviors such as smoking, drinking, poor nutrition, sleep loss, which contribute to illness and disease. Right. So it's like a perfect storm to some extent. All of those things, from the pessimism to the persistent stressors to the unhealthy choices, are basically going to cause those release of stress hormones, right? In some cases, it could be the unhealthy choices like too much caffeine or nicotine or what you're eating and things like that might affect your hormones also, which that can all of those factors combined can lead to the autonomic nervous system effects, which are like headaches, high blood pressure, inflammation. Your body is in a heightened state, and those are where you're going to see the things there. Immune suppression and potentially heart disease, right? And it's just going to get more and more intense with stress levels connected to what we're choosing to do to basically cope with the stress. Okay. But again, how you view the stress can also have an impact on this. So if I don't see stress as harmful, if I look at it, I'm like, this is just me getting ready for action, it will actually reduce the likelihood of developing these negative issues, because your body can, and it seems so weird, but literally how you interpret that aroused state affects how your body fights it. So if you see it as a positive, you are less likely to have inflammation show up. It generally isn't going to increase your blood pressure and things like that. Your immune system can function perfectly well, and in some cases it can actually function better if you don't interpret it as a negative stressor. There's been several studies that have been looking at that. How we interpret it and the response and how it affects us kind of goes directly hand in hand. And finally, random fact number 4. In general, people tend to read 10% slower from a screen than from paper. So if you wanted to increase your reading speed, put it on paper rather than just trying to read from the computer. There you go. That's the last random fact. So that should be all of them, and you are ready to go for the quiz. Good luck with that all. back to the lecture. Okay, 13, stress and illness, part 9, anger management. Individualist cultures, we have venting rage. This is going to be like America, right? You probably have heard somebody at some point, you're like, if you feel angry, just like punch a pillow or something like that. And the idea here basically is this catharsis, this emotional release. You need to let it out, get that energy out. The energy is built up, and you got to release it somehow. It's true to some extent for some people. Releasing that energy can be a good thing, especially if it's done in a healthy way. But fantasizing or physically going through actions like punching a pillow and just pretend like it's the person's face that made you angry or things like that, that's actually been proven to not be very effective for the majority of people. Because basically our bodies are very much connected to our psychology, and our psychology is very much connected to our bodies, right? And so if I'm feeling angry and then I start doing physical actions that basically would be angry actions, my body releases more hormones that are connected to that action, which is connected to the emotion of anger, which actually can then increase or intensify my angry feelings, right? It's like somebody, you just keep talking about this, this guy was such a jerk, and you just keep talking about it, and you keep talking about it, and you just find yourself getting more and more wound up about it. Stop talking about it, right? Emotional release isn't always that's not necessarily the best way to do it. So it can magnify the anger, behavior feedback research, and it can backfire potentially. Anger management strategies that have been proven to work. Wait, if you feel angry, don't do anything, right? Don't send off that email to that person who made you angry, your boss or whoever, teacher or whatever, right? Take a breath, step away, wait a day, right? Find healthy distractions and support is a big one, right? Get some friends and stuff, and don't just rehash the same problem. Be like, get my mind off of this. I'm not going to talk about this thing over and over and over again. This is what happened. I feel stressed. Let's go do something and let off some steam. So maybe that's just going and hanging out, going for a walk together, playing a game, maybe playing some video games together, going down and I don't know, getting a beer or something. Don't get drunk, but getting a beer or something if you're 21 or older. All of those things can potentially be those healthy distractions, right? Take your mind off it. Stop the pattern of just rehashing it, of ruminating on it, just kind of bringing it up over and over and over again. And by doing that, you generally are going to reduce the feelings. And then finally, distance yourself. If you are in the middle of an argument, let's say, and you feel your emotions coming up, right? As your emotions come up, generally your ability to argue is going to be going down, but also your ability to control yourself and what you say is going to be going down. So you're going to be more likely to say things that are very hurtful or things like that. If you feel that beginning to happen, take a break. Be like, time out. Let's come back and talk about this later. I need to take a break. And literally put distance between you and the person or thing that is causing the stress. So go for a walk, right? Step outside, get away, right? Like literally just get away. And by physically putting some distance and then coming back, letting yourself breathe, changing the environment, and then coming back to it later, when you've calmed down and you're no longer reading this as like a fight or flight, battle to the end kind of a thing. You can handle it much better, and you'll be in a much better place overall in order to kind of confidently deal with each other in that situation. So, okay. Yeah, those are going to be some big things that they have found to help. And with that, that's pretty much that module in a nutshell. So message me if you have any questions. Otherwise, make sure you do the quizzes. Don't forget to do those. And we are going to be going into module 34 next, looking at health and happiness. It's the last module for Psych 101, so we're going to be wrapping up with that one. So yeah, let me know if you have questions, and we'll go from there. Otherwise, have a great time, great day, whatever it is, and I will see you all in the next video. We'll see you. Bye.